So thanks everyone. As Tyler said, the panel is designed to bring together, so we have about an hour. We're going to bring together three different individuals from different perspectives of why and how clean energy is becoming mainstream. And so we have sort of a diverse set of perspectives from Department of Defense, from business perspective and cooperative, and from the Conservative Energy Forum. And so it's kind of the biggest bang for your buck in an hour to hear from all of these diverse voices and people that are engaged in renewable energy. And so I'm going to do introductions for each of the three panelists, and then you'll hear from them. But really what we want to do over the next hour is get questions from all of you as well. So similar format as the morning session, where use the note cards on your table if you have questions throughout the panel. Raise your hand. I think Jenny and Katie will be collecting them, and then Tyler will ask them throughout the last half hour of the panel. So I first want to welcome Gregg Herman, who's the General Engineer for the Department of Defense. He plans and oversees general construction and energy projects in the 88th Regional Support Command for the U.S. Army Reserve. And that region is 19 states, from Ohio all the way out west to Washington. So a pretty big region to cover. And recently oversaw a project in Milwaukee, which we'll hear a little bit more about during his presentation. And his region that he oversees now has over 0.5 megawatt of solar, and that's specifically just for the Army Reserves in that region. He began his energy career in the U.S. Navy nuclear power program as a submarine reactor operator. So if you have questions about that, feel free to put that on your card as well. Also, we have Larry Ward joining us, who's been the executive director of the Michigan Clean Energy Forum since it was founded back in 2013. Been a long-time Republican activist and conservative leader in Michigan, and his dedication to political activism on energy only matched by what he is involved in the community. So he's involved in a lot of community service organizations, serves on the school board, and was also appointed by the governor to the School System Retirement Board at the state level. And then in the middle, last but not least, Stanley Minnick, the Energy Services Manager for Organic Valley. His primary responsibility is facilitating energy efficiency, renewable energy projects, not only for Organic Valley, but for over the 2,000 organic farm members in the United States. So he works on short and long-term energy goals for the cooperative itself, but also works with the farmers, so the member farmers. So we're going to hear a little bit about both of those perspectives as well. Stanley probably looks familiar to a lot of you. He has also been involved in the industry as well before joining Organic Valley, working with a lot of nonprofits to oversee and work on group buy programs. Has also managed residential and commercial solar projects. I also want to mention, he did not put this in his bio, but something very important to me and I think several folks who have nieces and nephews or kids, he's also created a clean energy card game for his kids. So if you're interested in that, talk to him about that afterwards. It's fun.
I don't have any with me.
He doesn't have any with him.
Go to Amazon.
So it's available on Amazon. So again, if we'll go through, we'll hear from each of them, we'll have a short conversation, but then most importantly, get questions from you so we can have a great conversation. So Gregg, if we can start with you, and if you want to tell us a little bit about what the commitment of the U.S. the Army Reserves is, and then maybe a little bit about the project in Milwaukee.
The Army Reserve is operating to meet federal mandates for renewable energy, which is 25% by 2025. How that's calculated, no one is sure exactly if it's on the installation level, but we try and put them in wherever we can. We have about 0.5 megawatt of production right now in various locations. We also have a little bit of ground source heat pump energy and a very minute amount of thermal, solar thermal, but not much. And I'm right now trying to get built another about 2 megawatts of solar PV in various locations throughout the country.
And so that's 2 megawatts in your region?
In my region, yes. And the other 3 regions throughout the United States are, doing similar work.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about the Milwaukee project.
The Milwaukee project was a 125 kW project at our Silver Spring reserve installation. Typically, those of you that know about reserve installations, they're a little bit real estate constrained. So the size of the PV is, has to meet that restriction, which is why that one is 125 kW. I met Tyler and Amy because of a interconnection problem that we had with the local electric utility there, which took quite a while and a lot of lawyers to get through. But we eventually got it online. And the building that it serves, so it's 125 kW. If you look at PV watts on National Renewable Energy Lab, makes about 169,000 kilowatt hours per year. That's about 30% of the usage for the building that it's tied into. It's tied into one metered building, and we're net metering on that building.
Okay, so it's about 30%?
It's about 30% of the usage for that building.
Okay, and what do you use the building for? What's the?
Yeah, it's a reserve training center. So it's mainly, sort of an office building. It's got some reserve equipment storage in it. It's a pretty generic building.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that this is part of the reason that part of your job is now to procure renewable energy investment for your region and for other regions. The U.S. Reserves is doing that for all 3, is because of mandates. And the Department of Defense is probably one of the largest energy users in the country. And I don't know if you can talk a little bit more about the mandates, but also maybe how it differs the reserves and the larger Army, and kind of what their interest has been beyond the mandates.
Sure. As far as the reserves are concerned, I think on the national level, it's become an energy security issue. I can't talk a whole lot about that. I think the military branches are trying to integrate renewables into their resilient infrastructures so that in the case of emergency, it can be part of their, of course, they're trying to work them into microgrids. I feel like energy storage is sort of a missing piece of the puzzle to make that whole thing work. But as far as the Army Reserve is concerned, since we don't really have mission critical facilities, it's an economic issue for us. We use it just to offset usage and to save demand charges.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for that intro. We're going to move to Larry for a bit of an introduction on the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum. And I think maybe just to kick it off, Larry, just tell us a little bit about the story of how that got started in 2013 and kind of what the thought is behind having, what the need was, and why you have a Conservative Energy Forum over in Michigan.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thrilled to be here and invited to share our story with you. The Michigan Conservative Energy Forum was formed in December of 2013, so we're just about going into our 4th year right now. And the main mission and goal that we set up was to be a conservative voice when it came to energy policy, energy discussions. It seemed like for far too long, all of the discussion that took place on energy issues came from an environmental front, or certainly a left-leaning front politically. And my background is strongly in Republican politics, as Amy mentioned earlier. And I think there's a strong need to reach out to the right side and get their thing. So we come at this from a little bit different perspective. Our main goal was to, one, be that conservative voice, have a seat at the table. But our approach is from jobs and economic impact, national security or grid security, and then natural resources, or what we like to call the legacy that we're leaving for our children. And with those platforms and that focus is how we approach the policy and energy discussion and attract conservatives to the table. We do it with an emphasis on clean energy, renewable energy, and energy efficiency.
And so when it started in 2013, how long did it take for people to come on board, right? So if you were the executive director from the get-go, did you have support right away, or what was it like to sort of build that, and what have you seen over the past couple of years?
Yeah, our process began, in Michigan anyway, with a focus on keeping our credentials of conservatism to start with. We built a leadership team of about 12 different individuals, very well-known leaders amongst Michigan political circles that truly are known conservatives, but that were willing to come with us along this path to talk about clean energy issues and renewable energy and push for those items. So it was a drawn-out process. We've been around 3 years, and I would say the first year and a half was a building, a momentum. We really thought originally it would take a lot of grassroots groundswell effort amongst conservatives. What we found at the end of the day was that our leadership is getting there on their own as more of a grass tops level. So we reached out to all the Michigan legislatures and talked to them about this issue, showed them the polling data, showed them what it meant politically to them, showed it what it meant to them just from a sense of jobs and economic growth. And they came along a lot quicker than we thought they would.
If we can talk a little bit about, and it's a Wisconsin summit, but I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from Michigan. And so I think a lot of your work ended up in the culmination of a bipartisan energy bill that passed the last day of the session back in December of 2016. And if you can talk a little bit about what some of the successes that came out of that, some of the lessons learned. I know you and I were in the Capitol at 4 a.m. the night before the last day of session. It was an interesting process. But if you kind of talk about that energy bill and kind of what you saw, the successes from both sides of the aisle, and then some of the lessons learned or challenges.
Yeah, you learn who your friends are when you're up till 4 and 5 and 6 in the morning in a Capitol building. So the 3-year process we went through, you have to go back in history a little bit. Michigan had a 10% renewable portfolio standard in place starting in 2008 that was met by 2015. The question became for everyone in Michigan was what came next, what came after that 10% RPS, along with a whole litany of other energy issues. And the successes that we had that we never thought we would have early in this process was that now at lame duck and passage just here last December, a 15% RPS, so we had a 50% increase from where we were before. Thank you. And that was by 2022. We actually put an interim step in place to kind of kick-start the system to make sure that the new development of energy sources geared more towards renewable. We have a 12.5% interim step that we put in by 2019. So the next couple of years with the production, we'll really have to ramp up to make that number. Energy efficiency, both on gas and electric, were maintained out to the year 2022, and even gas indefinitely beyond that with some alterations in there. Net metering, we're closely on the net metering program. At one point in the process, it looked like we were just going to get waylaid on the solar industry and net metering. I believe what ended up resulting out of it was a pretty good approach. We have in essence a period of time where solar can continue to develop out to about 2020, we figure. They put in a process by which the Michigan Public Service Commission will look at what its cost, its true implications and cost are, and come up with a tariff of sorts. That's due by June of 2018. Even after that, it goes into a rate case discussion. So us as concerned interested parties will have a couple bites at the apple to take on that issue all the way out to when that rate case comes about. And then it'll go into effect after that. I think it's pretty fair shake for net metering, at least from where it started and where we ended up. One of the unique things in Michigan that I'd like to just briefly mention, because it is unique to Michigan, it came into play in the policy discussion, was we have a 10% deregulated market. It's a hybrid market, 90% regulated, 10% deregulated. They called it energy choice. It was really a big concern for the far right, obviously, for free market principles. That was under attack during this whole process. That stayed in place pretty much unscathed, with a little bit of minor things that the alternative energy suppliers need to show capacity and concerns like that. So we had a whole lot of successes along the way. I don't know that it would have been the lessons learned as the second part of that question. was really how well we collaborated and worked with all of the groups in Michigan, not just the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum, but from far left to far right, working certainly behind the scenes to make that all happen, and in doing that quite well, to the point where I think the main thing I learned from it was that Republican conservative legislators will change their tone. At one part in our process, we would have never thought they wanted to strip all RPSs out and energy efficiency completely removed. And by the end of the day, it was our Republican senators standing up saying, look, we need a 15% RPS to show the country and to show the world the importance of Michigan as it relates to our jobs and our economic growth. That's what we wanted them to do.
So we'll come back to some of those ideas and things maybe we can replicate here in Wisconsin. I want to turn to Stanley now. I know you have a couple of slides teed up, but if you want to start with some introductions on Organic Valley, sort of a description of the cooperative, your member farmers, and kind of what the projects you've been working on and some of them.
Yeah, I'd like to start by apologizing for the slides, but I wanted people to have a little bit of the background. This is the only text-based slide you're going to see. There's only 4 of them, so if anyone was planning on getting up, you can turn around. But the big number that's underlined there is 2,000 farmers, and if you'll go to the next slide, I mean, I can go into some of the other stuff, but that's, you know, we're up to 2,000 now. They haven't updated the graphic yet. We move kind of slow. But in 2017, we now have 2,000 farmers in around 35 states. And when you think about the impacts that extend, you know, those multiplier effects of a farmer installing solar and the solar installer doing the work, and how that relates to like rural communities and their ability to survive and thrive, it's hard not to get excited when I look at that map, because we can reach a lot of communities with a technology that, frankly, the big thing, if you'll go to the next slide, there's 2 of them like this, and this is what gets me up at 5:30 in the morning, is that the gentleman on the left there, he's more likely to take over his parents' farm because they're going to be saving money on energy costs for decades. And if that doesn't get you excited, you're in the wrong room, is the way I look at it. Because, and you can go to the next one too, there's only 2 of them. But to me, it's the technology's great, and we can talk about, you know, parts per million of climate or of carbon if we want, but I want to talk about is 210,000 people working their tails off every day in the solar industry, and then the 100,000 in the wind industry. And in addition to pointing out the work that Renew's done for 25 years, you should also look around the room for the folks who have been working in this industry for 20-some years. Andrew Bangert, I know he's not here, is the one that I always think of. That, you know, this is 1999 and 1991. I was really not even that good at riding a bike in 1991. So to be able to be here and to help our farmers through this technology and this market that's developed is really an honor. So anyone that's been here longer than I've been out of high school, thank you for your efforts.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point, Stanley. Can you do you want to talk a little bit about sort of, for those of you, those who haven't been following, Organic Valley, we've seen as a leader in the state, as probably one of the first businesses that have invested in renewables. Can you talk about some of your existing projects that you've done over the years?
Yeah, so we currently have 3 rooftop PV systems. They total, I added it up and I tried to change the decimal points. It's 199 kW DC right now. Wanted to get it to 200. Probably should have thrown another panel up somewhere. And then we also have a tracker, small tracking system at our headquarters. And then we have a partnership in partnership with Gunderson Lutheran in 2012. There's the Caston Greens Wind Project, which is 2.5 megawatt clipper turbines. And each of those produce about 6 million kilowatt hours a year. At the time, it was getting us close to 40% of our total load. We've grown since then. But at the end of the day, solar used to just be something that I wasn't with the company at the time with the cooperative, but it used to be something that Organic Valley did because it was the right thing to do. We're a mission-driven, farmer-owned cooperative, right? But now it's also like the CFO is also happy when I bring them proposals, which I think to see the tides turn and the economic benefits just be so apparent to people, it's really making the job, I don't want to call it easy, but a little easier to get buy-in when it's saving people money. So
You mentioned, it's interesting, as we heard from Barb earlier, from Dairyland Power Cooperative and your cooperative, and you said the first thing, is because of your mission. It's a mission-driven reason why you guys looked at doing the Cashton Wind project, why you looked at doing solar, and was it surprising to see the list of those companies from a business perspective that Tyler mentioned this morning that have also now kind of seeing the light or getting involved and wanting to invest in solar?
I'm not as much surprised as I am just encouraged by it. I mean, it makes good business sense. I mean, it isn't rocket science to see how locking in if you're behind the meter especially, how locking in your electricity rates for 30 years, how that's going to benefit your company. Even if you're paying even if your levelized cost of energy was slightly higher in the beginning, if you're looking at it on a 30-year basis, you're going to save money. You're going to cross that line at some point. I think you're going to see businesses, frankly, some of the folks on there have been pushing us to do more. And it's a back and forth with companies, like Target and Walmart doing just, Target did, I think, 16 stores in Wisconsin. I don't know if they were all in Wisconsin. They're pushing us with sustainability questions and also leading by example with their efforts.
Can you give a few more details about that, about how they're pushing you or they're asking you more questions? I mean, I would think from maybe at first glance that the bottom line, right, would be that's the most important piece for a business, but it sounds like because you're part of a supply chain that you're getting questions from the end users.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that Target or Walmart is willing to ignore price because we hit all their sustainability index questionnaires just right. So that I think that side of it is separate, like the purchase decisions and all of that. But in terms of the questions they ask us, they give us detailed questionnaires every year. What are you doing on farm? What are you doing as an entity for Scope 2 and Scope 1 emissions? Just really the whole list of questions that from water use and on down that they're asking, not just Organic Valley, but they're asking, Dean and all the other dairies that are out there as well to at least fill out the questionnaire. And then they rank us and we get to hopefully hang our hat on something if we do well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's from the cooperative's perspective. How do you work with farmers on their renewable energy projects? So how do you work with your member farms? Yeah,
so there's 2,000 of them, and my boss's boss told me I'll never be able to reach them all. I said, well, if you keep me around long enough, hopefully I will. A lot of it is we do desktop site analysis for the farmers. So some of them are in areas where there's not a lot of competition from an installer perspective. Some of them are in areas where there might be someone that can install it, but they don't have a real good grasp on the economic impacts of one of our farmers. So the desktop site analysis is really the key foundation for the solar side, when I can give them something that has what I consider a reasonable escalator for the cost of electricity and a reasonable starting price per watt and maybe slightly conservative output projections versus some of the stuff you'd see from an installer perspective. It gives them the confidence then to go out and get multiple bids. We also then will produce another report that we give to installers that, and we've only done a handful of these so far, but it'll lay out the system details that we're hoping to build to, where the system will go, and give an apples to apples comparison, or at least closer to one. So that's a big piece, is just helping them get information that they can trust. And then there's also the energy audit side. We fund a few dozen every year and more every year on-farm energy efficiency audits with a consultant firm, and then the big thing is implementing, and that's really what in 2017 we're really working on. Not just getting them information, but like helping them put technology to work. There's a whole list of ways we're working on that.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the reduced cost of price, and I'm going to kind of broaden this out to the full group. And we've heard this as a theme. I think that has helped mainstream renewable energy, especially solar, as the declining price. And maybe, Gregg, coming back to you and your projects, what you've seen through the Army Reserves as well as the Army, maybe how you've handled financing, sort of how the Department of Defense has handled, number one, approaching the viability of solar for projects or wind for your facilities, but
how have you approached financing? How do you approach the sort of energy contracts to make the financing work?
Well, the first part of the question, it's no news to anyone here when I say that the cost is trending downward, and we do some pretty broad budgeting, and I'd say we've gone from $4 a watt 5 years ago to maybe 2.5 now, depending on where we are. That's the kind of prices we're getting. But as far as financing goes, we do get money that is earmarked for energy projects. So there's a larger budget for energy projects. We use some of that to do energy conservation improvement projects, such as boiler replacements, LED lighting replacements. But part of that, a percentage of that, is just for renewables. So that's where I get a lot of the money that I spend doing solar projects. But increasingly, in the last couple of years, they've been pushing us to try and find third-party financing for our projects, and that is through ESPCs, U.S. energy saving performance contracts, and utility energy service contracts. PPAs are in the mix for the big military projects, not really for the Army Reserve, and enhanced use leases where developers continue ownership and maintenance of the arrays, and the military agrees to buy the power. But most of the money that the Army Reserve uses comes from earmarked energy funds from the DoD budget, and it's difficult to predict every year how much we're going to get, but that's sort of what keeps us going.
Okay. And you have this large region, and you said you have about 0.5 megawatt of solar so far in that region, looking at doing more. How do you select your sites? Is it, what is the combination of factors that go into that?
Well, as I said before, we're usually real estate constrained. So depending on how much money we get every year and how much capacity that pencils out to, we look for areas where we have space. We always do ground-mounted. We almost always do ground-mounted systems. Rooftops usually don't have enough capacity, or the orientation is wrong. So we usually do fixed ground-mounted systems. But we also look at we do an analysis of. So we get all of the invoices for those 300 reserve installations that we oversee up at Fort McCoy at the headquarters. We get all those utility bills right there. So we take a look at them and try and see where we have high demand charges, where our usage rates are the highest, and when we have space, we try and put them there. So, but sometimes it's we just have to sort of fit them where we have space.
Great. And I promised Gregg I wasn't going to ask him or have him speculate on what his budget was going to be moving forward. So we don't know. So I'm not going to put him in the hot seat. But Larry, I'm going to put you in the hot seat of sort of what might be coming next with after the elections this fall. It's about as far as I can go. But what do you see this as not necessarily an opportunity or a necessity to kind of further engage the conservative message, and knowing that there is room and there has to be room for more of this conversation?
So the elections and the results, I've actually, in the spectrum and the people that I work with there, like I said earlier, across the board politically, I feel and I understand the angst that's out there with the Trump administration coming in. I referenced this the other day to say that I thought it was a new paradigm with a big question mark at the end of it. What's going to happen? What direction are we going? I had two things when I say that too. One, on a states-based level, we're seeing a large, and we have for a number of cycles now, a heavy push towards conservative election cycles. You look in Michigan, House, Senate, Republican, all governor. You look in Wisconsin. We're seeing that even the Trump trend that was out there The positive that I do take away from it is that there is this notion out there that it's more of a state's issue. So programs like mine that are taking place in Michigan and expanding out to other areas, I think are very key and important to getting the state energy policies correct. And I still do believe at the end of the day that whether the things like Clean Power Plan are now pushed back down, if you get the right motivation at the state levels, those things will still occur, just not from a federal level.
Great.
But again, a big question mark at the end of it.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's interesting. We're seeing a lot. The energy policy discussion and debate is happening at the state level and will continue to happen. Tyler, I'm going to look to you right now. I see you have a pile of note cards. And so if you want to throw out a question or two from the audience.
Thank you. I've got questions for all three of you and Minnick. Gregg, first off, I think your mic is a little soft. Is there any way you can move it up your title? Okay, perfect. If a company wants to install a solar project on an Army base, U.S. Army Reserve base, what is the steps? Do they have to wait for a federal RFP, or do they just call you?
Don't call me. No, all of our projects are posted on FedBizOps. I don't know, it's where every federal opportunity for a business is posted online. So every array that we do, for the most part, gets posted there. We do have, I do work with some federal contracting agencies that have pre-approved, a set of pre-approved contractors that can put these in. But if you want to get on that list, that RFP will also be on FedBizOps. So if you look there for, solar power or geothermal, it should all be right there. If you're an installer or an engineer, it's all right there.
Great.
Thanks. Next question for Larry. How did you advocate the renewable portfolio standard increase to conservative legislators who tend to oppose mandates?
Yeah, very good question, and it's a battle that we've had for years now, and I'll put it in two different categories, same discussion, mandates and subsidies. They both seem to have this reaction in conservative circles as opposing anything to do with mandates and subsidies. So when we approach it in Michigan, we started with the argument that it's not a mandate. Of course, we have created an energy system in our country using utility companies and set groundworks and ground rules into place that set them up as regulated industry, and therefore the requirements we place on them are just that, requirements of a regulated utility. So we try to argue that it's not really a mandate. Well, it's easier for them just to say it's a mandate and they want to get rid of it. We had a discussion the other day about mandates in general. Where do they go? Do you think, the future of them? I would rather see us start working towards a number of other solutions and not really doing the mandate. Yes, in Michigan we got it through. I don't know that in this year we would have gotten it through. There was a lot of other dynamics that were taking place there that allowed it to happen. So that battle will continue to get harder and harder. I think more importantly is that we come up with solutions going forward that they can offer up that drive clean and renewable energy production in this country. And there's a number of those things that we can talk about that don't require a mandate.
Can I just jump in, just knowing a little bit more about this, can I just push you a little bit on this? Is
Yeah.
do you think part of the reason that you were able to get the 15% mandate is because there was not the opposition from the utilities? I mean, we heard the utilities kind of said, we're going to make it anyway. Of course we're going to get to the 15% because we're building the systems, and they get to own all of the systems that get you to the 15%.
Exactly.
So they spent the majority of their time keeping those of us who advocate for rooftop solar really busy.
Yeah, and
the metering versus the RPS.
right, and I'll add not only the utilities, but the business community was there too. We have companies, large data company like Switch that comes into Michigan, puts in a $2 billion worth of investment in Michigan, and they go to their utility company and say, we want 100% renewable if we're coming to Michigan. So not only the utilities know that it's happening, it's going to get there, but the business community is asking for it. So that's that part about mandates. Yeah, it probably wouldn't have. There was that other dynamic in Michigan that took place as it related to the choice people. And at the end, at the very end, they all wanted to remove anything to do with the RPS still, even though it was an easily obtainable number for us to reach. I will say the one thing that I didn't add earlier was that the governor in Michigan also put in a goal written into our legislation that is where he started before we got to the RPS increase. And that goal was for a combination renewable and energy efficiency at 35%. It was, by some people's standards, just only a goal. How's it going to get there? But it really tells the Public Service Commission that's where we need to get to. We layered in underneath that still some RPS and energy efficiency requirements. So yeah, mandates are still going to be an issue going forward.
Question for Stanley. As a co-op, can Organic Valley take advantage of the federal tax credits for solar? And if so, how? And I'll add the corollary of for your own operations, but then also for your farmers. And how does that work for your farmers?
So I'll start with the farmers. Well, actually, I'll start with the farmers because they're all individual farm businesses. They all own their own operation. They're responsible for what goes on the farm. So they can all, as their financial situation dictates, take advantage of the ITC, depreciation deductions, all of that. There are some issues with anyone that knows farmers knows they operate on very thin or non-existent margins. Sometimes that's for other tax purposes. Sometimes there is some interplay there that makes it hard for them to take advantage of those incentives. Part of our thing is putting them in touch with CPAs that can help them kind of assess that, who have the knowledge and experience in solar, and actually met one at the last conference down in Chicago that has been pretty helpful. As far as our cooperative, we cannot roll forward or backward the way that a corporation can. So really for us, like if we have one really amazing year, we might be able to absorb the 30% ITC of a large project. But I'll tell you, the 65 kW system we installed this year, we're not getting any ITC benefit from that. What we're getting is cleaner air, and we're getting, all those other benefits that come along with solar, hedging against future increases and all of that. But we aren't able, as a cooperative, with our financial situation as well, to really take advantage of the ITC. And it leads to seeking out creative solutions.
Tyler, I'm going to keep coming to you. Yeah, I just want to make sure we hear from those questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in there.
Okay, great.
They're all great. So Greg, I'm going to ask you a 2 or maybe 3-parter here. Was recently on Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii, and was surprised and pleased to see so many solar panels on military housing units. And is this happening in other areas of the nation too? So solar on housing units. And then the second question, also technology deployment, is microgrids. Are you looking at designing microgrids with solar or other battery storage, Army Reserve, or other parts of the Department of Defense?
Sure. Housing, definitely. I think there's a big push to get solar on rooftops of military housing just because it's sort of, free real estate for them to install renewables. Even especially in Europe, I know it's practically a matter of course for them to do it there. So yes, I've seen a lot of military housing projects that have solar and, some ground source heat pumps, all kinds of renewable items. The second part of the question, microgrids, not in the Army Reserve. As I said before, we don't really have mission critical facilities, but in the larger military sphere, energy security has become such a big issue that yes, it's been going on for some time. Actually, in Hawaii, they did do a pilot project for a microgrid down there. I can't say how it went, but I know that they're looking into it, and I think the key part of integrating renewables into that whole system is, as I said before, the storage part. And of course, the military has to pick which buildings they want to power up in case of an emergency. So, there's it's a big task for them, but it's definitely going in that direction. And hopefully, well, my hope is that a lot of technology comes out of all the money that gets spent in the military, and hopefully that distributed generation microgrid technology, eventually makes it out to us here and gives us some answers for some of the problems that we face with renewables.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit because as one of our platform issues for the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum is grid security, national security. We work really close in Michigan with the Michigan National Guard. And both the Camp Grayling base and the Fort Custer base in Michigan have taken this triple net zero approach to making sure they are self-sustaining as being a National Guard unit in emergency situations. And they are driving pretty hard towards a microgrid systems there. They have solar installed on both. They actually have a pilot project that they started up out of the Department of Energy for wind funnels, not tall up in the air, wind funnels on the ground. So they're both up and running and pilot testing those right now, along with wastewater treatment, all being self-contained in their base. So I know that the National Guard, certainly in Michigan, and we've worked closely with them, that's one of their goals.
Great. A question that I'll have both Stanley and Larry answer. I think you'll have different perspectives. No offense to you, Gregg.
No problem.
Might not be a question for you. So solar is profitable now because of the past efforts of, in quote, mission-driven advocates. So what should the role of those advocates be going forward? I'll start with Stanley.
Working harder. I mean, we face a time where we're not certain about, what the ITC is going to look like in a few years, if it's going to have the nice, predictable path. But I know a guy sitting over in that area that was selling solar when it was $9 a watt. Our job, a lot of the hard work has been done. We still have to bust our humps and get things done. But leading by example is really the way to go. I don't have anything I can really say to that this year, but hopefully either next year or the year after that, we can talk more about that as far as a cooperative. But for us, it's about stewardship and teaching our farmers what they can do and hoping that spreads through their communities as well. And just looking at the trickle-down effect of renewable energy.
I'll add activation, getting involved. Just like this group here, I do this across the country in a lot of different states. And the net metering issue is so important. And Amy can attest to the fact of what's happening in all these different states. They're picking and choosing their battles of where they can get a victory to stop solar expansion. And for our organization and conservative pushes on it, it's about energy independence and people being allowed to produce their own power. And the more activated you are and the more engaged you are, I work really close with a lot of solar installers, solar providers, solar manufacturers in the state of Michigan. They just need to step up and keep hammering away at each state.
Let me ask you one question too about how do you work with those mission-driven advocates? So there's many of us that's why we came to solar, right? You want to do something positive, and it's great that it's now kind of coming along, and there's room. We want to make sure there's room for more voices to get to the answer, however you get there. But how do you work with Michigan Environmental Council, the Sierra Club chapters in Michigan, those advocates that those are probably the ones that have showed up for the RPS hearings on the RPS and asking for that for the years. How do you interact with those mission-driven advocates?
Yeah, and a lot of
it. Or what would you recommend?
And here's the approach that we've always taken, and I always say this line, that we'll probably all get to the same end game, but for different reasons. And a lot of the groups that we work with across the full spectrum are driven for different motivations, and when they do that. So I think from a engagement part is find the group that you're most comfortable with in your own setting. And if the mission that they're on you believe in, because at the end we're all going to still push towards an increase in renewable. I think it's how you advocate for it based on your own systems and beliefs.
Great. So taking a little bit of a different tack, and I'd like to have all three of you answer this one, and we'll start with you, Gregg. And the question is about electric and alternative energy vehicles. And so basically, I'll ask a two-part. One, what's going on in each of your institutions or sort of positions on supporting more electric and alternative energy vehicles? And then, what do you think we could do to make more of that happen? Is that a priority?
In the military, we divide for tracking purposes energy up into some different categories. One is for building, one is for transportation. I deal all with the sort of building oriented energy, but so I know not cars really, but the Navy has made huge advances in the use of biofuels. But I do know that what I can say from the Army Reserve perspective is that we have put in some charging stations, and the question is coming up more and more. Actually, up at Fort McCoy at the headquarters, we have a Chevy Volt that's part of our fleet with a really long extension cord to get into the building. But yeah, it's we're definitely using electric vehicles now.
Stanley, how do you see that being part of the mix at OB?
Well, so we've had a biofuels program in place for quite a while that helps farmers either, we have a mobile biodiesel processor. Some of you have probably seen at the Energy Fair. So we have that side that, we can help our farmers process their own feedstocks into biodiesel and feed for their animals. But on the electric vehicle side, our facilities both have, it's just 2 right now, and I think hopefully the plan is to add more this year. When those vehicle charging stations are put in, people buy the cars. I literally made the decision to buy my Volt or lease. Let the battery technology improve before I purchase it, I guess. But I made the decision based on I drive up to Lafarge. It's 2 hours away, so I definitely use some gas to get there. But half of my return trip and half of my trip up are all electric. And they have a charging station right there, and it's essentially my employer is providing my half of my ride home. So I was just talking with someone the other day that was referring to the charging stations that Alliant Energy put in. And, they had a handful of vehicles that were, of their employees at their headquarters that had electric vehicles. I think they've got a couple dozen now, just by installing the infrastructure to make it easy so you're not fighting over a charging station or you've got somebody icing you out and leaving their large vehicle parked there for no reason, So I think the infrastructure piece of charging stations is gonna be big, but also range extension. Getting to 236 miles. Maybe it's not as essential. It's exciting though.
And I'll add, we looked into 2017 issues since we just came off in 2016, had a lot of great successes. What issues would we take on and where would we head in 2017? At least in the state of Michigan, being a big 3 auto state, there's a lot of electrification of vehicle discussion taking place. All of them will talk about advanced mobility, autonomous driving vehicles. We just recently passed a law to try to capture and move ahead in that jobs and economic development of autonomous vehicles. The one thing I will say about electrification of vehicles I think is so important. We talked a little bit earlier about this shift in the paradigm that I talk about under a Trump world coming up. The one thing he does push for is infrastructure build out. I think there's key places where we could go on a federal level and say, look, we really want electric vehicles and a cleaner vehicle environment to take place. We need to build it out in this country. So I think there's a connection that we can make there on infrastructure build out, which is where Stanley was too.
All right, Tyler, more questions?
Do you have any?
Well, I can certainly ask some, but I just want to make sure I'm not
I've
monopolizing.
got some, but I think you should ask one.
More Amy Hart, remember?
I think it was show her the door. So I think actually one of the questions that I have for the 3 of you are recommendations on how to tell these stories. So I think we'll hear this afternoon from Adam from the national perspective, right? In a lot of states and on the coast, quite honestly, that renewable energy and solar is more visible and it's taken off. But there's a lot of great stories coming out of Wisconsin, coming out of the Midwest. And I'm looking for recommendations. I know, Elizabeth is here from the city of Milwaukee. Sure would love to help tell the story of the investment that the Army Reserves has made in the city on renewables. But what are the recommendations? What have you done to tell the story of renewables and investment? Or what recommendations would you have that we need to basically showcase what we're doing more?
Well, one big piece of all of the strategic energy plans in the military is education, and that usually takes the form of either email blasts or newsletters. But what I've found is that the newsletters don't get very good distribution. It goes to the local user list, and it doesn't really get out into beyond sort of the people that already know about it. I think if a local government wants to know about what's going on with the military, I would encourage them to contact the public relations person at the local installation, and I'm sure all of those newsletters get to that person, and if they want to take it further out to the community, then that's probably the best way.
Do you do sort of education or public relations with the folks that use the building, with your reserves members, with the community at large?
Yes, we do. We do training with our facility operations people, our facility managers. Not so much with the end users, just because of the nature of the reserves. A lot of them are only there for a couple of days a month, so it's difficult to fit that training in. But like I said, newsletter usually makes it to them on an email list somewhere. But yes, the people that operate the building definitely get energy management training. It's a big part of the strategy.
Nice. How about from you two, recommendations on how to tell our story better, whether it's to the public, stakeholders, legislators, so they can start hearing the diverse projects?
I know that, so I mentioned earlier the Michigan Conservative Energy Forum and where we've taken it in the state of Michigan. We looked at a lot of other states. North Carolina has conservatives for clean energy. Most recently, Virginia just launched. Ohio's there. Minnesota has one. We're actually doing assessments in about another dozen states that are looking, does this model make sense to advance these things? And how do we collaborate all together? Because part of that puzzle in some states is missing. We don't have the messaging for the conservative side of it. And I encourage everyone to embrace that and gather it. We are looking at Wisconsin right now and doing some work with some local people just to get an assessment if it makes sense to do it or not. So that would be my word of encouragement, is to seek out those collaborative efforts that are out there from a wide spectrum. And then it doesn't have to be that everyone is the end-all be-all. Everyone stays within their lane. And this is how it worked in Michigan very effectively, was that we took a lane and we stayed within it, knowing that the groups to our left and right were in their lane doing their jobs. But behind the scenes, we were certainly working together for the same end goal.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I was actually going to tee up for you the thing that I spoke about it earlier, and I go back to it over and over again, partly because of my own history. This is a huge opportunity. It's an economic opportunity. Climate change is an opportunity, and you don't have to talk to Larry about climate change to get him to support solar. That's obvious. But what you do have to talk about is people who maybe the alternative to a blue-collar or green-collar job is working at a place where they don't receive a living wage. And now they're dependent on the government for their health care, and they're dependent to basically keep the lights on in their homes. Whereas if we can provide green-collar jobs that can support a family, does anyone ever argue against that angle?
And that's the basis of jobs and economic growth, and that's what we have to bring it back to.
And I just encourage people to talk about that, and then just in the conversations you're having amongst yourselves even. And then I just go back to I was on a farm, Mark Parker's farm, 125 years that farm had been in his family, and to hear him talk about his son building a house across the street and taking over the farm, like there are stories out there that don't have to do with the sky falling or policy that resonate with everybody. And we're in the Midwest. There's tons of farmers. We all need them. So I talk about the farmers all the time. I talk about the economic mobility piece and how that impacts spending on social services and things is something for the Larry Wards of the world to cover, but it's relevant. And in my own personal story, anyone that knows me, you know, this industry has really changed my family's life, and it has the potential to do that to thousands of people. Let's talk about that. That's my recommendation.
Well, we're at noon, and there are more questions, but I'm going to advise anyone that didn't get their question asked to sit with these folks at lunch and ask your question, because they're available and they'll be having lunch with us. So I think we should close it down. But I think it was a great panel, and we want to thank all four of our panelists, or three panelists, one moderator. Thank you all so very much.